I'm going to quickly work through all these problems that you worked on in class today, just to make sure that you are on the right track when you work on your homework. On number 1, we have negative 2, which is kind of like saying negative 1 times negative 2. Negative times a negative equals a positive. Number 2, we have a nice exponent right here. And so it includes the negative that's inside of the parentheses, but then there's still a negative outside of the parentheses. So that guy's just going to be hanging out on his own over here. And then the negative 2 squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. So I'm going to put that right here. So my answer ends up being negative 4. On number 3, negative 2 squared, that's a mean exponent. That negative in front is not included, so he's going to be hanging out on his own here. 2 squared is 4, so the answer to this one is also negative 4. Number 4, same thing. Once again, I have a mean exponent, so that negative's hanging out right in front. 2 squared is 4. Same answer again. Number 5, 2 squared, that answer is 4. And number 6, negative 2 quantity squared, so that's a nice exponent, so that's negative 2 times negative 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Negative times a negative is a positive, so this answer is positive 4. All right, now we're getting into negative exponents. Remember that negative exponents do not mean a negative number, they mean the inverse. So on number 7, when I have negative 2 to the negative first thing I notice is that that exponent is a mean exponent, so the negative in front is just going to be hanging out in front. And then I have 2 to the negative first, so that's saying take the inverse of 2 to the first. The inverse of 2 is 1/2. So my answer is going to be negative 1/2. On number 8, it's similar. That once again is a negative, or is a mean exponent. So that negative out front is just going to be staying out front by himself. And then I have 2 to the negative second, which is like saying take the inverse of 2 squared. 2 squared equals 4. The inverse of 4 is 1/4. So this answer is negative 1/4. Number 9, negative 2 to the negative first. Negative 2 to the negative second. Once again, it's a mean exponent, so that negative is still just hanging out in front. And then I still have 2 to the negative second. That negative in the exponent is saying what's the inverse of 2 squared? 2 squared is equal to 4. The inverse of 4 is 1/4. So this answer is once again negative 1/4. Number 10, the difference is that now that negative is included inside the parentheses. So this exponent has become a nice exponent. So now this is saying what's the inverse of negative 2 squared? So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. The inverse of 4 is 1/4. So this answer right here is 1/4. Number 11, negative 2 to the negative second. Now notice that this is a mean exponent. This negative directly in front of that 2 is not included. So let's work inside of the parentheses first. Okay, for now let's not worry about this negative way in front. So negative 2 to the negative second, that negative is just hanging out in front because he's not included with the exponent. And so now I have 2 to the negative second. So that's saying, what's the inverse of 2 squared? Well, 2 squared is 4, so the inverse of 4 is 1/4. So inside the parentheses, I have negative 1/4. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring down that negative that's outside of the parentheses. So now I have negative 1/4. So once again, that's like saying negative 1 times negative 1/4. A negative times a negative equals a positive. So this answer is 1/4. On to number 12, 2 to the negative first. So that's just saying, what's the inverse of 2? Well, I know that's 1/2, and that's my answer. Number 13, negative 2 to the negative first. That's a mean exponent, so that negative is just hanging out by himself. What's the inverse of 2? We just said it's 1/2, so this answer is negative 1/2. Number 14, negative 2 to the negative first. Once again, that's a mean exponent. That negative is still just hanging out by himself. And I have 2 to the negative first, which 2 times in a row now we've said that the inverse of 2 is 1/2. So the answer to number 14 is negative 1/2. Number 15, negative 2 to the negative first. Now that negative is included, that became a nice exponent. So now we have to ask ourselves, what's the inverse of negative 2? So if I have negative 2, the inverse of that would be negative 1/2. Because if the inverse of positive 2 is 1/2, the inverse of negative 2 would be negative 1/2. So this answer is negative 1/2. Number 16, negative times negative 2 to the negative first power. All right, there's a lot going on here, so let's start inside of our parentheses. We have negative 2. We're going to raise that to the negative first power. So we're asking ourselves, what's the inverse of negative 2? We just said the inverse of negative 2 is negative 1/2. So I'm going to write that. That's in my parentheses. And then I still have that negative out front. So negative 1/2. That's like saying negative 1 times negative 1/2. Negative times a negative is a positive. So this answer is positive 1/2.